You're watching Dog-Eared Musings, and I'm Monika, and today I'm doing a book review of my most anticipated book of the year, which was Mariana Enríquez's book, Our Share of the Night. So, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, Mariana Enríquez's short story collection, is one of my favorite short story collections. I have a really hard time recommending this book to everybody just because this is a very gruesome collection. Every short story contains just jarring stories in this book. Enríquez uses horror and also political imagery to create just really graphic and grotesque imagery in a way that is different and new. So it's really hard to say that I recommend this book to everybody because it is very, very intense. But when I heard that her first full novel, Our Share of Night, was going to be translated into English this year, I was so excited, and the book ultimately jumped into the front runner of my most anticipated books to read this year. And then I heard that it was 600 pages, and immediately I got super intimidated. This review, I'm going to be talking about, was this big book worth the hype? But first, who is Mariana Enríquez? Enríquez is Argentinian, and her writing explores themes of politics, gender, and just really grotesque body horror. And she does all of this in a very new and unique way. She has described herself as being a part of the literary and punk scene, specifically the punk music scene in Argentina in the 70s and 80s. In a Guardian article that she wrote, which I will link below, she talks specifically about her references to slasher horror films, Stephen King, and watching the show Twin Peaks, which really, she said, informed her as well as the peers around her and how they talked about their own grappling with the political atmosphere around them. She talked about how using horror and the pop culture of horror really helped her be able to vocalize her own experiences and translate it for others. So, what is Our Share of Night about? Let me again first preface Enríquez's writing with a huge trigger warning. You know what works for you as a reader, and you know how certain themes might make you feel. So I highly suggest you research this book and its content before reading if you think that it might not make you feel good. So this book focuses on our main character, who is imbued with this magical power. He can see the dead, and he is brought into this magical cult to kind of extend the life of the cult members. And this is only brought through the process of this deep and dark magic that he works with the darkness in these really harrowing scenes that leave him very, very hurt, both physically and mentally. Our main character realizes that his son might have these powers transferred onto him. And so our main character kind of goes into this large process to try to make sure that his son doesn't ultimately become him in the kind of grappling with the darkness. We have a haunted house, a scary cult, a political landscape, and all of this is just set in a very eerie and terrifying backdrop. And it's ultimately a story about the bonds between a father and son. And this isn't a heartfelt story, it's more of a jarring tale. And this is, again, set all behind the backdrop of colonialism and colonial critique and political drama and trauma that is going on in Argentina. So what were my Cons. Let me first start off by saying that this book was huge. It was 600 pages. And I don't usually get intimidated by big books, but for some reason reading this book definitely felt like work. I want to chalk it up to mainly the repetitive nature of the writing. So this book is split into sections, which really helps with the organization and flow of the story. But one thing that I felt myself feeling really frustrated about in my reading experience was these split perspectives ended up repeating a lot of the same information. Our main character is constantly hurt and in pain, and this makes sense, but the process of how he becomes a part of the cult and just a lot of the main plot points in the story are repeated over and over and over again. And I don't think it really benefits the reader. Like, it would be one thing if seeing the same plot point from somebody's other angle gave the reader a little bit more context and a little bit more new information. But in my experience in reading it, it really didn't feel like that. It just felt like the same thing over and over again, which when you're reading a 600-page book, you can just delete that. You can edit it. And then on the other side of things, it really didn't expand where I wanted it to expand. There wasn't a deep dive into these relationships. Like, we know there were romantic relationships that were kind of briefly explored, and our main character and his son, this was talked about briefly, but there was just a real disconnect between all of the characters, and I really couldn't feel very invested in any of them, which, when the stakes were heightened because I didn't feel as connected to the bonds within any of the characters' relationships by the ending part of the book, which was like the most heightened part of the book, I didn't really feel as connected or invested as I was hoping I would be. So what are the pros? Again, Enríquez does just such an awesome and amazing and unique way of talking about contemporary politics in a horror landscape. And it isn't done in like this trite way of allegory. It isn't heavy-handed. Enríquez just shows the political landscape for what it is as a backdrop, and it just feels very naturally eerie. And she also is able to explain it in a way that is for the audience and brings people in, but also doesn't explain it too much to the point where she's dumbing anything down. Also, there were just some really, really creepy and unsettling scenes where I felt like I really needed to read the whole book with the lights on. It was just 600 pages of my heart just like beating so fast, feeling so nervous, wanting to get to the end so that I could know what was going to happen. And there were just some very like satisfyingly scary scenes in this book that made it an exciting read for those parts. So what are some read-alikes? If you like Enríquez, what book would I recommend for you? Well, the first book that came into mind was the short book. I think it's a novella, although maybe it's a little bit over 100 pages. I don't know. This is Bazterrica's book, Tender is the Flesh. The reason why I picked this book is because this is another political horror book that focuses on a alternative future that affects the meat supply, and humans are kind of forced to make dietary choices that are not advised. They're all cannibals. They're forced to eat human meat. But this is seen from a political lens, and what is really exciting about this book is Bazterrica talks about how this choice affects literally every angle of society. And at its core, Tender is the Flesh is another book that really delves into the bonds and the grief of the loss of a father and a son, which I think is another theme that is explored in Our Share of Night. It is just another point that these are two Argentinian authors who are doing really amazing horror work, but they both grapple with kind of the same themes in a very jarring light. I will say for Tender is the Flesh, I think this goes without saying to read the trigger warnings. This book, although it is tiny, it is mighty. As in, every page that I read this book, I literally felt nauseous. So if you think that this is a book that might be interesting to you, please take this warning before you open that book. I'm going to conclude this review by saying that, of course, I think Enríquez is an amazing writer, but I will say that I left this book feeling a bit burnt and with a little bit of resentment. It felt like every time I was picking up this book, it felt like work. And when I'm reading something for enjoyment and just for the sake of leisure, I really don't like saying that that's how a book made me feel. But it really did. And I think that makes me really sad to have to admit in this review that I really, really wanted to walk away saying this is just another example of why I love Mariana Enríquez. But I think I end up walking away from this book feeling very burnt. Will I read another one of her books? Yes, most definitely. If it's 600 pages, I might need to wait a little bit, but I'll definitely think about picking it up. Anyway, that has been my review of Our Share of Night. Let me know if you've read it and your thoughts on it below. Let me know if you have any really good horror book recommendations. I'm always looking for a new one. I hope you have a great week. This has been Dog-Eared Musings. I'm Monika. Happy reading.